It's been a year since the release of Star Wars Outlaws, and I wanted to revisit the game to see where it stands today. See, back in August of 2024, Outlaws released to a pretty solid critical reception, netting a Metacritic score of 75 across the industry. Regardless, the reception for Outlaws was pretty mild considering the manpower Ubisoft had put behind the game, with reportedly over 600 developers working on it. In fact, the Ubisoft CEO came out not too long ago and stated that Outlaws missed its sales targets due to the fact that people are quote unquote bored of Star Wars. Well, I played the game a while back, and I can assure you that was not the reason as to why it failed commercially, but we'll get into all that in a little bit. Regardless, it's been a year since the game's release, and I want to revisit the title and give my updated thoughts, and by the end of the video, you'll have a pretty good idea as to whether or not this game is for you. If you guys enjoy these types of videos, whether it be reviews, retrospectives, and revisits, make sure you hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Alright, so I want to first start with one of the largest updates that Outlaws received. See, Outlaws was a really weird game when it released because of its mission design. It had these long, forced stealth missions where getting caught didn't mean you had to fight your way out, but instead it meant mission failure. Of course, this type of gameplay is pretty outdated and it was met with a ton of criticism for it. It didn't even fit Ubisoft's typical approach to mission design, where they normally give the player total freedom however they wish to complete a mission. As stated, however, this was patched and it ended up being one of the best patches they could have released. Getting caught no longer means that the mission is over. Instead, you can fight your way through or try to stealth your way out again. If you don't want to stealth, then of course you can now go in guns blazing. This sounds like a small change, but it was genuinely really needed. I sometimes wonder what the initial review scores would have looked like if the game didn't just fail you every time you got caught by an enemy. I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of the people were originally turned off by the game, and honestly, they probably have no idea that this has since been improved. Now you can go in and complete missions how you see fit. Of course, the game still recommends a stealthy approach, but that is no longer completely required. Now, in my original review of the game, I noted that I found the actual gunplay to be above average. Guns felt good to shoot, they had different weights to them and feels to them, and the impact looked great as well. It made sense though, considering the game was developed by the studio behind the Division series. On a side note, for me, it was really strange to force that team into making a stealth-focused game when clearly their specialty is gunplay. I still imagine a version of this game that really went all out in terms of its shooting mechanics. Regardless, today the game stands as a better version of its launch date. For example, in an update back in November of 2024, they improved the shooting mechanics by adding weak points on some of the higher health enemies. Additionally, they even let you keep weapons that you picked up and not have to drop them if you climb a ladder or vault over something. It's funny to even mention that, but clearly the devs had a vision for the game when they were developing it, and they really limited how often they expect the player to wield a gun. There's also been more changes made to the overall combat flow, like smoother weapon switching that makes K feel less clunky during shootouts. I'm reading some of these patch notes as I go, and I'm smiling a little bit because some of these improvements are so subtle that even if you have played the game before, you probably wouldn't even notice some of these. That's an argument I'm going to make towards the closing of this video because I have a ton to say about the content of these updates. Anyway, aside from the gunplay, stealth is very much a viable and not only that, a preferred option in Outlaws. I found stealth when I played to be very serviceable, but it's really nothing out of the ordinary. Kay has the ability to sneak up and knock out enemies with a single strike, and she can use her companion Nyx to distract enemies as she makes her way from cover to cover. It's very basic stuff and it just works. One of the very first updates that released by Ubi actually adjusted the stealth quite a bit, making you less likely to be detected while rolling. And believe me, I use the rolling mechanic quite a bit. There were other smaller updates to these stealth mechanics, mainly adjusting enemy behavior during some missions, but that's really it. In general, the whole pivot on the stealth mechanic, in my opinion, really hurt the game substantially. It's hard to not imagine what this game could have been if the devs weren't locked into a stealth-first paradigm in terms of mission and gameplay design. During my playthrough, to be honest, more often than not, I would just take the approach of walking in and shooting everything that moves because that was much more fun to me. The guns generally felt good to use and the fundamental stealth mechanics don't do anything special that would cause me to go and approach it time and time again. So I want to talk about the world design because the world design in Outlaws is of course fantastic. No patch can ruin that or change that. During my first playthrough and my most recent one where I revisited the game, I genuinely had a great time exploring the different planets and cities within them. I mean, I always have to give credit where it's due. Ubisoft deserves it time and time again because their world design is some of the best in the industry and they create some of the most dynamic and lived in worlds out there. The four main locations that you'll visit in this game all carry a unique personality. Tatooine is exactly what you'd expect, a large, sprawling desert wasteland that is kind of dotted with some small outposts and farms. Akiva is covered in this dense rainforest, and there's this wildlife teeming there. And honestly, that ended up being my favorite planet to spend time on. Toshara has this whole rocky aesthetic to it. And finally, Kajimi doesn't actually play like a traditional open world. Instead, that planet is more so just a tightly packed city hub where there's tons of activities to do, but no open world to explore. Of course, though, each of these places does feel handcrafted and really detailed, and just moving through them gives you the sense that the developers really put their best efforts into crafting these environments. Time and time again, we see this in many Ubisoft titles, Assassin's Creed Origins, the Division series. They do a really good job in creating these detailed worlds. Now, moving between these planets is done by menus and transitions rather than actually being able to pilot yourself from one planet to another. That would have been a cool touch, but ultimately that was never really in the scope of the game. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention space combat. I gotta be completely straight up here. While the upgrade system for your ship is actually kind of cool and engaging, where you can find new parts and new cosmetics, I didn't find the space combat itself to be all that great. It felt pretty basic and bare bones, which essentially amounted to shooting in front of your target ship and cycling through different fire modes. Like the stealth, it's all just very fundamental and not exactly something I had much fun doing. But that's not to say that Ubi hasn't at least tried to improve things in that department. In the May 2025 update, they added the space contracts, which basically amounts to space-based missions that didn't exist before, giving you more reason to spend more time in orbit than on land. And yeah, that's basically it. Anyway, walking through the bigger cities is a highlight. NPCs are scattered everywhere, going about their daily routines. You'll see merchants bartering, playing games in the cantinas, or even pulling you aside to share some pieces of intel that'll lead you down some side mission with some unique reward. The environmental storytelling is as strong as ever. You'll overhear stormtroopers hassling merchants, or maybe you'll see a syndicate member trying to shake somebody down. All this subtle stuff really does go a long way in selling the world, and I think Star Wars Outlaws really does a great job at this. Now, just imagine these cities filled with static NPCs. Yes, Avowed, I'm looking at you. Within these beautiful worlds, however, is very Ubisoft. You got your points of interest scattered around the map. You'll have treasure chests that usually end up being crafting parts or repeatable contracts that'll pull you across different areas within that open world. The design is very solid, but ultimately it ends up being really predictable. Where the game shines the most is in these unscripted moments. So like every so often you'll stumble into a dynamic event. Maybe you'll see like Imperials raiding a pirate convoy or maybe some pirates doing the opposite and trying to take down an Imperial convoy. I'm not gonna lie, in my original review, I was pretty harsh about how the game ended up just following the same tired Ubisoft formula. What I meant by that is essentially turning the open world into a large checklist. Now that I've come back a year later, I'm going to step back from that opinion. Truthfully, it's just hard to think of what they would do differently. They couldn't just go and reinvent the open world wheel, but at the same time, I guess my expectations for the game might have been too big. What's there is serviceable, and that's like the third time I've used that word in this follow-up video. Maybe the game is just exactly that, just serviceable. Anyway, the main way to get around on these open worlds is with your speeder. The speeder itself doesn't always feel great to handle, and in one of these stranger design decisions when the game first launched, you couldn't freely aim your gun and shoot from the speeder. No, instead you had to use what amounts to a marking mechanic and then let K fire off shots automatically. I honestly couldn't believe I wasn't able to just free fire. Like, how is that possible? How is that feature not added to the game? Anyway, all that has changed as of May of 2025, as now you can, believe it or not, freely aim and shoot from your speeder at your discretion. It's crazy. another fairly mild addition that took about 10 months to release. And believe it or not, that was the highlight of these patch notes. Literally, it's like the first thing that they highlighted. They're so proud. If anything, the weakness of the world design isn't how it looks or how it feels, but more so in how it's used. The planets, of course, are gorgeous, but the gameplay loop that's inside of them always kind of does the same thing. You're always going to go on that same side quest. They start to repeat themselves. It's really the Ubisoft formula that you've either come to love or hate at this point. Now, the reputation system is probably one of the game's biggest disappointments for me. Now, hear me out. I went in thinking this would be one of the biggest factors to draw me in. Four different factions, each with their own territories, their leaders, and their goals. I thought I was going to get lost in this whole system, but instead, it turned out to be just extremely surface level, essentially being nothing more than a reward track, almost like you're on a battle pass. Gaining rep will make things easier on you by allowing you safe passage through different faction territory. You'll also get better deals at merchants, and sometimes you'll get some unique gear for completing quests, including cosmetics. Getting on a faction's bad side basically does the exact opposite. If your reputation gets low enough, then they'll start attacking you on sight. Merchants won't trade with you, and you'll only be offered the worst jobs possible. Sounds simple, right? Well, that's because it is. I guess maybe it's just a me problem. Maybe I went in expecting something more deep and engaging, but what it comes down to is just a number of different side quests you can do for different factions. Some side quests will have you making a decision between which faction to help or hurt. I purposely made it my mission to get on the bad side of the Crimson Dawn faction just because I didn't like their leader, and I made sure my reputation got down as much as possible. I thought this would have at least locked me out of their reward track or made it so that I can't work for them anymore, but that wasn't the case at all. Despite willfully choosing to betray them at every chance I got, they were still willing to work with me. I get it, it's not a morale driven RPG system or anything of that sort, but still, I was just hoping for a little bit more there. Regardless, it's something to add more flavor to the game. Some people may like it, others may not even interact with it. The whole reputation system hasn't gone under any changes since the game's release, and there's really nothing to update there anyway. The skill system in Outlaws is another aspect I want to touch on because honestly, it's one of the better ideas Ubisoft has had here, and something I would love to see in future titles. Unlike most UB games that rely on a standard XP bar and level system, and not just UB games, really any RPG, Outlaws instead ties its progression to a group of specialists called experts. There are 9 of them scattered across the galaxy, each with their own specialty like weapon handling, survival, health, melee combat. And after completing a mission for an expert, you unlock access to their skill tree. And from there, it's not about grinding XP, but about completing specific challenges to unlock new abilities. For example, if you want to unlock a health upgrade from the gunslinger tree, you might need to defeat a number of enemies while at low health, or survive a gunfight against Imperials at a high wanted level. Other skills ask you to scavenge materials or interact with certain systems in the open world. It's a refreshing change from simply just watching a arbitrary bar fill up, and it gives you more agency in how you approach progression. If you want to hone in on a specific build type, then getting all the upgrades needed is at your discretion. Now, the abilities themselves, though, are kind of hit or miss. Some are more practical than others, like expanding your healing capacity or unlocking access to heavier weapons you couldn't normally carry. Others are a little bit more fillers, such as slightly reducing stamina drain or marginally improving Nyx's distractions. Still, I think the foundation here is strong. It really encourages exploration and playing outside of your comfort zone if you want to unlock some of those better abilities. There's also a gear layer that complements the skill system. Kay has equipment slots for her jacket, boots, belt, and each can provide different passive buffs or even set bonuses if you equip matching pieces. Charms function pretty similarly, giving small stat boosts or tweaks to gameplay. None of it is as deep as a full RPG system, and it definitely shouldn't have been anyway because it's not that type of game. But combining these gear slots with the expert skills, it adds enough personalization that 2 players might have completely different K builds and they'll probably approach the game differently as well. If Ubisoft ever makes a sequel, this is a system I hope they continue to expand on. Not only that, I would like to see similar systems in other games. It was nice not having to grind an arbitrary XP bar to get my next skill point. In Star Wars Outlaws, Ubisoft set out to tell a scoundrel's tale, a smaller scale adventure compared to the galaxy ending wars and narratives that you've come to normally expect from Star Wars. Kay Vess isn't on a mission to save the world, she doesn't really take sides, and her loyalty is often sold to the highest bidder. She navigates the criminal underworld, building alliances, and trying to carve out a future for herself. It's very much a one last job type of narrative. The issue with Outlaws in general is that it falls pretty short in building a cast of characters that are worth caring about. All of the characters you meet are very surface level. We rarely learn any backstories or what their motivations might be. It's unfortunate to say that even Kay's character and backstory is very underdeveloped. Sure, we learn a bit about who she is and how she became so good at sneaking around and surviving the underworld, but there's not much to it. Even the flashback she has, where you think you're about to get some lore drop or some crucial bit of information, are pretty vague as well. I just feel like there really wasn't any character development in this game at all. We never learned much about Kay, her and her allies, and even the villains in this game don't feel like these characters that are built out with any real detail or depth. I'm gonna say the word again. The story is serviceable. Sure, it's enough to get you through your initial playthrough, but there really isn't much going on here that you haven't seen before. Anyway, here's basically every patch that Ubisoft has released for Outlaw since the game's initial release. And before I wrap this video up, I do want to briefly discuss the content of these patches. If you get the feeling that they are pretty bare bones, then you'd be right. I'd say the only patch that is really worth even mentioning is the one that happened within the launch month that removed the forced stealth requirement for a majority of missions. Other than that, the actual content of these patches is pretty thin, with the highlight of each update being something so minimal and most definitely not worth coming back to the game for. I'm not sure anyone is coming back to check out free aiming on the speeder, nor is anyone gonna come back strictly for these space contracts. The game has been out for a year, and outside of the DLCs, there really hasn't been any major content drops. The Wildcard DLC was really tiny, which just added a single mission for Kay and introduced one new character. A Pirate's Fortune was a bigger DLC that revolved around a new playable area, a new trade league system, and some new characters. But outside of that, the game has seen very little. This leads me down a crossroads. The first of which shows me that Outlaws is more in a maintenance state and won't be seeing any larger patches or content drops, and essentially support for the game will end sooner or later. The other road shows me that maybe, just maybe, Ubisoft is gearing up for a large 2.0 patch that will bring in new players and old players back. I only say that because Ubisoft drops some really random patches like Avatar's first person mode, which will be coming out later this year. Let's just hope for the best for Outlaws. Anyway, I think it's time to wrap this review and revisit up. I think Star Wars Outlaws honestly is a decent game. I don't think it's bad, but I also don't think it's great. I've said the word many times in this review, and I'll say it just one more time. The game is serviceable. If you're looking for a 20 to 40 hour adventure through the Star Wars universe, then this game gets the job done. There's enough here to keep you interested in terms of the side content, the explorable areas, and the main story. However, it would be very hard for me to recommend the game at full price. Thankfully, these days, it's very often on sale, so if you can find it for half off, then I'd say you can go ahead and pull the trigger. Anyway, that's going to wrap this review and revisit up. Thank you all for watching. As always, if you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that like button. If you're new here, subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.